Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for making an effort to come in today. I know it's been a bit difficult, also for myself. I live on the northern beaches, heavily flooded last night, and I'm really happy that I made it in for this special event, and happy that some of you made it too. We also have a large group of participants joining us remotely, and I would like to welcome all of those as well. Before we begin with the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built. As we share our knowledge, teaching, learning, and research practices within this university, we may also pay respect to the knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. For everyone who is joining us remotely, please keep yourself muted. We will have a Q&A session in the second part of this event, during which I invite you to unmute yourself and you can ask a question, but please, for now, remain muted. A recording of the presentation will be available post the event. And again, we will have a room for questions at the end after the sort of formal presentation. Now, in this first ITLS Leadership and Policy Seminar for 2022, we would like to celebrate International Women's Day, which was yesterday, with time difference globally, squeeze it in today. And in that context, it's absolutely wonderful to have one of the most successful women in corporate Australia addressing us today. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jayne Hrdlicka, who is CEO of Virgin Australia. To me, this is a dream come true, and certainly a highlight in the ITLS Leadership and Policy Seminar series. Maybe it's because I'm not only a bit of an aviation geek, and also quite a tennis fan, but I've heard so many wonderful stories about her leadership style that it is really quite a pleasure to have her speaking to us today. Jayne has over 20 years of leadership experience in the consumer, industry, and aviation sectors. And prior to her appointment with Virgin Australia, Jayne was formerly CEO of A2 Milk Company. Jayne also had various leadership roles at Qantas Group for nearly a decade. She was instrumental in the design of Qantas Loyalty Program, was CEO of Qantas Loyalty and Digital Ventures, as well as CEO of Jetstar Group. Jayne is a former senior partner with Bain & Company in the firm's customer strategy and marketing practice, and also led Bain's customer practice for the Asia region. Jayne serves as chair of Tennis Australia and is a member of the Hawaiian Airlines Board of Directors. She's also a member of Chief Executive Women. Very nice for the International Women's Day sort of thing. And today, Jayne will focus in her talk on Virgin's transformation journey, which has been really successful so far. And I look forward to a fascinating talk. And thank you, Jayne, for coming. We're really grateful for that. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you. The floor is yours, Jayne. Thank you.
Thanks, Rico. Can everybody hear me? I can give a thumbs up from Matt, who I can see. Awesome. So before I get started, I also want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and just huge respect for the land on which we stand today. And I also want to acknowledge International Women's Day, wherever you are. We'll call it International Women's Week. It is a really important opportunity to stop and reflect on how much progress we've made in ensuring that women as well as men have equal opportunity and are treated fairly and reasonably in the careers that they choose and in the lives that they lead. And unfortunately, there's still way too many examples in the world and in our own backyard where we've got room to improve. But it is important to reflect on how much has been achieved, and the opportunities that we all enjoy today are because of the achievements that have already been made. But it's really important that none of us walk past the issues that we see existing in the community as it stands day to day, whether it's bad behavior, whether it's bad policy, bad practice. We all have an obligation not to walk past issues that we see, but to observe and try to make a difference everywhere we can to improve and ensure that the next generation of women coming through schools, coming through every aspect of our economy have equal opportunity. And in fixing it for the women, we're fixing it for everybody, because not all men are the same either. And we've got all sorts of diversity that is really important to our communities, whether it's cultural diversity, religious diversity, sexual orientation, ability levels. I mean, the Australian Open this year was just beautiful. The finals series, there were 8 Australians in the finals, which was fantastic. But we also had, as Australian of the Year, Dylan Alcott, who is wheelchair bound and has been for his entire life, but Ash Barty winning the women's and doing that in a way that is so balanced and clear about the importance of diversity. And then Rafa Nadal just proving that age is not a liability. It's actually a huge asset because of the wisdom that it provides you. So I could just think there's so many benefits associated with getting it right for women, because we get it right for everybody when we create an environment that is open for all. So with that, I'll just say it's a delight to be here. And there aren't very many of you in the room. And so it's important just to acknowledge that too, because I got off the plane yesterday into Sydney and actually reflected on the fact that I'd already been through this once in Brisbane, and I'd actually chosen to arrive in Sydney in the middle of a deluge, which ultimately resulted in horrific flooding yesterday. And it's created massive problems for so many people across New South Wales generally, and specifically in Sydney yesterday. So my heart goes out to anybody who's been impacted. Mother Nature's really let us know that we have a responsibility to look after our environment over the course of the last several years. So it is everybody's job to do that too. Aviation is not the easiest industry to manage our carbon footprint in, but we are absolutely committed as an industry to get to net zero by 2050. It'll probably take to 2050 to do that because of the technology challenges that sit at the heart of carbon emissions for aviation. And it's technology issues with respect to the equipment, and it's technology issues with respect to the fuel. And both those things are just going to take time to get us to a place where we can actually be net zero in a cost-effective way. But it doesn't mean that we wait to 2050. It means that every other thing that we can do now with respect to reusable plastics, getting rid of single-serve plastics, electrifying airports, managing our carbon footprint on the ground, generally speaking, those things are easier for us to do now. And you can be absolutely assured that as an industry, we're all over it. And as an airline, we're all over it, as are all of our partners. Most of our corporate partners actually want to work with us on this count because they are thinking through their entire ecosystem, which I find really encouraging. And one of the benefits of COVID is that we've all had a little bit of time out to stop and reflect. And stopping and reflecting with respect to the environment has been done, and done pretty comprehensively as far as I can tell. And everybody coming back out of COVID is much more conscious of their carbon footprint and intending to make a big difference on that count. So I'll just say that as a backdrop. And what I wanted to do today was just give you a little bit of history on Virgin Australia and a bit of a twist on aviation in the mix, because I do think it's important to understand how Virgin Australia has come through administration in the context of the history of aviation Australia, and then talk about the administration process and Virgin coming out of it, and then a little bit about what we did to ensure that we're fighting fit now, and talk a little bit about the opportunity that we see going forward. So with that, I'll just start with history. I mean, Virgin Australia is 20 years old now, and at the heart of Virgin Australia is a lot of amazing things. Richard Branson and Brett Godfrey did an awesome job in establishing an airline that really has a brilliant culture at the heart of it. And that culture and the orientation it gives every one of our people to really fundamentally try to make a difference every day when they come to work is at the heart of what's enabled us to come out of administration. And it's at the heart of what's enabled Virgin Australia to be successful over 20 years, despite a very difficult 10 years in the mix. The first decade of Virgin Australia, it was a low-cost carrier. It's called Virgin Blue. And it was the first low-cost carrier. Jetstar came in after that and created an even lower cost base, which kind of created a difficult spot for Virgin Australia. And Virgin Australia went up market, and in its last decade tried to be like Qantas, tried to be a full service carrier and tried to compete head on head for the pointiest end of the marketplace. Now, anybody who studied the market will know that that very pointy end of the marketplace is a thin space. It's not big enough for two players. And you actually have to carry a whole lot of people in addition to that very top end of the marketplace, and they all expect great value. And so the first decade was actually a profitable decade for Virgin Australia. The second decade wasn't a profitable decade for Virgin Australia, and a lot of shareholder value was destroyed. Interesting shareholder composition with four foreign carriers in the mix over time. And of course, it ended in tears when COVID hit. But whether it was COVID or whether it was an ash cloud that caused a serious disruption in flying in Australia, anything that hit revenue for a short period of time was going to cause Virgin Australia to go into bankruptcy because the balance sheet just did not have the resilience in it that an airline needs. This is an industry where there are a lot of things that are outside our control that affect demand and that impact our cost structure. Rico and I were talking about the implications of the war between the Ukraine and Russia and the impact that's having on fuel prices globally and the impact that will ultimately have on aviation. And I'm not losing sleep over that. I am losing sleep over the war because it's a humanitarian crisis of some magnitude and it's a devastating thing that's even happening. But I'm not losing sleep over fuel price. One, we're well hedged for the immediate term, but two, these are things outside our control. And so we just have to adapt and adjust to it. And prices will probably go up as a consequence because it's just too much inflation all at once. So once hedging rolls off, you'll see prices going up. But they won't go up that materially in terms of impacting demand, I don't think, unless we get to crazy levels of fuel prices that we've never seen before. And these are just realities in the industry. So for Virgin Australia, it was going to be something. And as COVID hit, it was COVID that took Virgin Australia into administration. And Virgin Australia is very lucky because, as those of you who understand the history of aviation in Australia would know, Ansett probably taught what, 20 years ago?
2001.
2001.
September before.
Yeah, so 20 years ago, not to be specific. 20 years ago, Ansett went into administration and it didn't come out. And the issues, though, for Ansett were quite different. Because what caused Ansett to go into administration really was not 9/11, although that was the thing that was a trigger, but it was the shareholder fight that had taken place, protracted shareholder fight for over a year, determining who would buy out News Corp shares, which created distraction. And anybody who runs an airline knows you can't have your executives distracted in a very competitive market. And the second thing was that the strategy that Air New Zealand brought to Ansett was just wrong. And it assumed that the Australian aviation market was like the New Zealand aviation market, and it just wasn't going to work. The cost structure of Ansett was too high to do what Air New Zealand thought they could do. And so Ansett didn't come back out of administration. Nobody was prepared to put more capital into that airline. Virgin Australia, quite different. Hotly contested, lots of private equity interest globally, came down to 4, then went down to 2, and Bain Capital were the winning bidders. And Bain Capital were the winning bidders because they had the best strategy. They had a really clear understanding of what they wanted to do with the airline, and they were interested in building an airline that would stand the test of time, that would ensure that this great brand has a legacy for decades and decades and decades to come. And that's why they won, because they were prepared to make the investments, they were prepared to think about investing for the long term and to ensure this great brand has an amazing future and all the people in it. And at the nub of it, when you looked at Virgin Australia as a bidder, as I did, you saw an airline that had just lost its way. And at the nub of it was a great business. And if you got rid of the international long haul operation, which was losing a fortune, and if you backed out of the regional business, which was also losing a lot of money, and both those things added a huge amount of complexity back into the core airline, if you back those things out, and you focused on the domestic market and a short haul international operation, and then you thought about growing from that in the future and thinking very carefully about managing complexity, you had the basis of a really great business. Plus, we had a velocity frequent flyer program, which was seriously underperforming, and a lot of opportunity embedded in it, and a charter business based in Western Australia that was also underperforming and had a lot of potential in it. And so when you looked at it from a strategic standpoint, it was pretty clear that there was a path to daylight. And if you focused on the core, which is the case with strategy in all industries, if you focus on your core and you build from your core, and you do that with clarity about what is core to your business, you usually can find great success as long as you're disciplined about how you think about building strategy around your core. And so that was the play. And administration and COVID actually created this perfect storm where while the airline was going through administration, really the whole industry had stopped. And so it wasn't like Ansett where the airline was off the field in the middle of normal practice from the standpoint of the economy, which gave it a serious handicap with respect to coming back. In this case, the administration process could be run and finished before the industry actually came back, and the administration process could take advantage of the COVID era. So it was a really great lie of the ball for all of private equity, but for Bain Capital in particular, it was great because we had a clear strategy and we were prepared to invest in the future. And there was a lot of debate at the time, should the government have bailed out Virgin Australia? And that would have been the wrong answer because Virgin Australia needed to have a reboot. It needed to have a strategic reboot, and it needed to then step back and reflect on how on earth it got into the place it was in the first place, and therefore fix all those things. And the strategy was obviously stripping back to the things that really mattered in the airline, investing in the things that mattered for the future, but also rebuild the business process and practices that had enabled really bad decisions to be made for a decade. And that's not such an easy thing because that requires a reset for a whole lot of people. And that's not always easy to do. And I'll talk about talent and people and how important that is in a few minutes. But a big part of the strategy was making sure that we had fixed the underlying issues in the airline, not just taking advantage of administration, not just taking advantage of the window of opportunity, but also fixed for the future to ensure that we could go from strength to strength in executing against our strategy. So, and those of you who understand anything about administration, which is Australia's version of bankruptcy, it really does give you the ability to go back and reset every single one of your contracts. And so having the ability to do that during COVID with your fleet, well, that's a gift. Because one, we had a bunch of aircraft that we didn't want anymore. They were long haul aircraft or short range aircraft for the regional operation. But two, we had aircraft that had been purchased and leased in some cases in the middle of the peak with exchange rates working against us. So it gave us the ability to reset all of that in an era where lessors were sitting with lots of aircraft manufacturers were sitting with lots of aircraft. So we got very good lease deals, very good aircraft purchase deals, best in the industry, best in Australia. And that's a huge thing because it's a big part of your cost structure going forward. So we were able to take advantage of that with all of our major suppliers, including the airports, to get rid of things that had been agreed to in the past. It just didn't make any sense, should never have been agreed to, get rid of things that no longer made sense because of what had happened as a consequence of COVID, and then offload things that just didn't make sense for us as a business at any point for any price going forward. So fast forward then, we get through administration, we've done a whole lot of heavy lifting, we've reset our cost structure, but we still now have a long list of things to go do to drive fundamental transformation across the airline. I step in as CEO the day we came out of administration, and I spent the first 2 weeks out talking to people in the business. And the first week was spent on the front line, talking to our pilots, talking to our cabin crew, talking to engineers, talking to the ground services team, asking them simple questions about what needed to be protected at all costs in the airline, what needed to be changed at all costs in the airline, and what were the things that they really wanted to make sure I knew that would help me make sure that we were making good decisions going forward. And I got such great feedback. I mean, it was really, really extraordinary. I had clear views about what the strategy needed to be. I'd been involved in diligence. I'd had my own thoughts. I'd spoken to lots of pilots, cabin crew, ground services team members, and engineers before. I'd spoken to all the unions before. But I really wanted to hear it from lots of different people to get that diverse perspective on what was working, what wasn't working, and what the priorities needed to be in terms of transformation of the airline. And the feedback was loud and clear, and our frontline teams had better clarity on the issues of the business than people in head office. Because they'd been observing, many of them had been around for 20 years, and they'd seen what was beautiful in the airline, they'd seen where we'd made mistakes, and they really wanted to make sure that we got it right this time because their jobs were at stake. They were all panicked when the airline went into administration. Why? Because many of them had worked for ANSET. And they knew how hard it would be to come out the other side, and they wanted to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So they were more than forthcoming with feedback. And interestingly, as I finished that process, I had 3 guys from the baggage room who wanted to talk to me. We call those ramp employees, and they wanted to talk to me about people. And they wanted to make sure I understood how important it was in their view that the board of directors from the past was no longer involved in the future, because they viewed it as the board's job to make sure that bad decisions weren't made, and bad decisions were made. And therefore they said, what was wrong with governance at the top? And that's fantastic coming from your ramp team members to have that point of view. And it was great because I was able to say that board's no longer around. And we have a very new board now, which is populated purely by shareholders, and they all have your interests at heart. And they get the fact that bad decisions were made in the past, and they have no interest in doing anything but fixing that part of the organization first. And the second question was, what about management? Because that head office is full of people who made really bad decisions and risked all of our jobs. And what are you going to do about that and the processes that enabled bad decisions to be made? Which I thought was really instructive. I mean, I knew that too. So it wasn't a Shazam for me, but it was fantastic that it was on all of their minds. And in the lead up to me taking my role at Virgin Australia, there'd been quite a lot of momentum by interested parties to ensure that I never set foot inside Virgin Australia. So there's a lot of really bad media, which was, not fun for me, but it is part of the industry. So I'm not a stranger to it. But for my team members, they all said, don't you worry about what the media said, because we've spoken to our colleagues at Jetstar and they said, we're lucky and that you know how to make money. And that's the most important thing for us, is learning how to make money as a business, because we had that right in the beginning and then we just stopped caring about making money. And you can't be successful as an airline if you don't make money. And I also thought that was fantastic, because sometimes in really big businesses, you lose sight of the fact that you have a whole lot of employees and they all have a really important point of view. It's not just the guys in head office that you should be listening to, it's all the people in your business. And in the current world where technology creates 0 degrees of separation between the front line and the CEO, as a CEO, you absolutely have to take advantage of that and do a whole lot of listening, because those perspectives that sit across your business are the key to unlock your perspectives on how to run a great business. And especially in an era where transparency is key and all that nuance and details really super important to be understood at the top. And sometimes layers of management get in the way of clarity at the top, and you really can't afford that, especially in aviation where margins are thin and there are a lot of things out of your control that work against you, both from the standpoint of demand generation and cost management. So that for me was super instructive, and then spent a lot of time with management. And then collectively, we went off site, the top 50 executives in the company, we went off site and we crafted our strategy and we agreed what had to happen. And every single person in the room said, gee, the most important thing is we fix the broken processes and practices in the business that led to bad disciplines and a lack of focus on making sure that the things that we thought we should do had business cases and that everything stacked up in terms of being financially prudent for the business. It's all well and good to be really focus on your brand and be really focused on the experience you want to create for consumers. But if you're not clear about the consequences that creates to your cost structure, then you're actually not able to make good decisions. And if you're not really clear about the consumer's perspective and what position you play in the market, and then how to think about costs through that lens, you're also missing a perspective. So you really have to understand your stakeholders and what observations they have, what works, what doesn't work. And you really need to understand how your consumers think about your business, because they also have one of the most important views in your ecosystem. And those two things enabled us to put together our strategy and embark on a journey of significant cost transformation. We've taken over $300 million out of our domestic cost structure after the process of skinning things down to our core. And we're nowhere near finished. Our cost structure today is very competitive with the most cost-effective carriers in the marketplace. And we're really clear about who we are. We're in a value position in the marketplace. We're not trying to be a full service carrier, and we're not trying to be a low cost carrier, we're trying to be ourselves. And we know that the vast majority of consumers want great value, and most consumers would like to have the very best price, but there are a handful of things they'd also like to have. They'd like to have a frequent flyer program. They like to have choice in terms of seating. They want to know that on a special occasion, they can fly in business class, or they can fly in premium economy if they're really tall and it won't cost them a fortune to do it. They want to know they've got choice and that you're not baking in all these costs into the ticket price, that people can choose what they want and they're paying for the experience that they've chosen. And so we've taken that lens, and they want, richness and color and flair in the way the experience is delivered to them, but they don't want that to cost them a fortune either. And so we've taken all that into perspective in how we've made decisions, and we're making a ton of investment. It'll be close to a $300 million investment in technology, because we're a decade behind in technology investments. Basic things that a business in this era should have, we don't have. We're well on our way now. We're about 18 months into that investment. But there are lots of things we need to do that improve employee experience as well as improve our guest experience, in addition to taking cost out that enables us to fund those things, which also enable costs to come out of the business. So you get this nice virtuous cycle going if you're investing in the right things in the business. Because if you're investing in the right things, they're driving improved productivity, they're making your people happier, and they're making your guests happier. And you get that ecosystem rolling in the right direction, and it's a really powerful thing. We're not done yet, but our performance today, looking at all the other carriers in the marketplace, our performance today is excellent. And the underlying demand that's starting to build is fantastic. You would have seen in the media yesterday, we're in January, the largest market share of any single carrier in Australia domestically. We came out of COVID with 58 aircraft. We now have 87, and we're still growing. We've increased our fleet size by about 45% since we've come out of administration. And that's by design, because we came out of administration managing our risk in recovery. We didn't know what was going to happen in Australia. Thankfully, we hedged our bets a bit, because we all expected December last year was the breakdown of borders and the reconnection of Australians, and that we were on our way back to learning to live with COVID. We were a year too soon, and Delta came along and caused everybody some serious concern and nervousness. Borders crashed down again, or crashed up again, and we had serious dysfunction with revenue, and all of our people, have had ups and downs with, being busy and not busy as a consequence. But we had carefully managed how much cost we were bringing back so that our fixed costs weren't too high while we were going through the most extreme periods of volatility. We had fantastic support in the industry from government, which helped us maintain all that vital infrastructure for Australia. Because make no mistake, without the aviation infrastructure in this country, the economy stops. Us moving people around is absolutely vital to cargo moving and absolutely vital to the economy moving, and people being able to run their businesses successfully, small businesses being able to grow, and consumers able to spend money from one state to another. For every $1 spent on a plane ticket, another $10 is spent on the other side. So it's a really big cascade in the economy. Everybody knows that, understands that. And so from a government standpoint, we were a priority infrastructure to make sure it was maintained. But we were careful in how we did that. We're really proud now to be in a position where we can secure a third of the market. We fully intend to be 33% of the domestic market. We think that's important because in order to play our position in the market, we have to have the depth and breadth of our network to ensure that for business customers, we're able to give them what they need in value proposition, which is frequency. And for leisure customers, we're able to give them what they need, which is range of destinations and frequency that fits against the leisure schedule. And those two things combined we need to be roughly 1/3 of the market, so 33%. And we now have the capacity to be able to do that. We also intend to be a very successful short-haul international carrier serving Bali, New Zealand, and Fiji. And we're toying around with some other destinations that we might be able to do with our 737-800 series. And we'll contemplate whether we want to re-enter long haul once the long haul market sorts itself out. It's impossible to tell today what's going to happen with long haul travel from a business standpoint and what's going to happen with long haul travel, how quickly it will come back from a leisure standpoint. I believe it will come back very strongly. How quickly does it get back to where we hopped off in 2019? I don't know. I think the wisdom coming out of IATA right now is that takes 3 to 4 years. We'll wait and see because we've got the luxury of waiting to see. Our long haul operation was not a successful operation in its former incarnation. And so we had no qualms about getting out of it with protected slots where we think we'll likely go back. And we'll just work our way through what makes sense as the market starts to unfold. China and Japan are still very locked down, which includes Hong Kong. So it's very difficult in the region to contemplate even playing a role in the region, given it's impossible to predict how things come back. So we look at the future as incredibly bright. We think we've got a winning strategy that works really well in combination with the other experiences that are available for consumers to choose from in the marketplace. We have amazing people, talent and people. I said I'd come back to, but it's at the heart of any successful transformation. Obviously, I went through the process with all of our team internally to say, what's our strategy? Once we had our strategy, we set the new organization structure. And once I had the new organization structure, I spent time with the previous executive team to say, who's interested in which jobs. And at that point, many opted to say, this isn't the job for me now because this is a fundamentally different experience than the experience that I had before. This is a job that requires me to get into the detail, roll up my sleeves, and be a hands-on leader. And for many, that wasn't what they wanted to do. So that was fine. And down through the next 2 layers of management, we're probably at the top, we have changed out about 80%, 85%. And the people who've stayed are phenomenal. And the next layer down is about 50%. And the layer below that's about 35% of people, executives who existed before who've chosen to leave or were encouraged to leave as a consequence of the fundamental change in strategy and change in approach to day-to-day leadership and management inside the company. And that's not unusual in big transformations where something has gone so incredibly wrong for a period, because what's required to be in a position where you're running a successful business is quite different from what existed in the past. And for me, in being successful as an airline, what the most important thing is diversity. We talked about International Women's Day up front, but the reality is that you cannot run a successful organization of any type unless you have a really diverse mix of people at the top. And they have a really diverse mix of people underneath them and cascading down through the organization. Why? Because you need different perspectives and experiences and orientations on things when you're debating an issue or when you're looking at an opportunity. You need to be able to de-risk whatever it is that you're thinking you might want to do, or you need to get underneath the hood on whatever it is that's causing issue in the business. And if you're all the same, you're going to come at it very similarly. If you're very different and you balance each other off in terms of your experiences and your natural biases, you will surface the best possible solution with the least damage with respect to the trade-offs that you have to take. It's just a fact. Whether it's sport, whether it's the arts, whether it's government, you need to have an environment that brings the best out in people. And I actually think that the best leaders in the future will be people who have had the ability, they've figured out how to build diverse teams and get the best out of everybody. And that will be what differentiates you as a leader in the future. Because if you can't do that, I don't think you can run an organization to its potential. And if you can't do that, somebody else should be in your job. And so I think it's pretty simple. We celebrate International Women's Day, and there are a lot of big things to do. But to me, in driving a business through a big change or running a business successfully, you do have to have a really diverse mix of people, and you have to have the right combination in order to be sure that you can deliver on the opportunity that you have for your shareholders or your stakeholders, whoever they might be. And so that's what we've done at Virgin Australia, and we're largely finished with that. And what is amazing is that talent breeds more talent, and you end up being, one of the most coveted places to work as a consequence. And we're well on our pathway to do that. It bothers others in the industry when you do that, because you've created fair competition, not only for consumers, but for people. And that's at the heart of it. If you can do that as an organization, then you really need to work hard to rethink your culture and rethink your settings, because you can't compete if you don't have amazing people in your business. So I might just leave it at that and open it up to questions, Rika.